Let's do that thing again where we analyse cycle lane usage and rant nonsense about different bits and bobs. Today's going to be politics, schmòlitics. So everything's absolutely bonkers, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether it's Scotland, the UK, Europe, or the rest of the world. The political situation is absolutely nuts. Where are we focusing on today? Joe Biden. What a character he is. Have you ever seen the zombie movies where the zombies can only move like 2 or 3 miles an hour, but they always end up being able to catch their prey, their victims? Joe Biden reminded me of that. You've seen him turning around, trying to walk off stage during speeches. There's a famous shot of him when he's with the heads of Europe. Georgia, Maloney and Macron and all that type of palaver. And it more or less looks as if he shits himself on stage, doesn't it? So the guy has absolutely no cognitive ability whatsoever. Yet we're led to believe he had the codes to America's nuclear arsenal. Now, he obviously wasn't running the show, so who was? It's an interesting question, isn't it? I personally think Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and who's his Tony Blinken. I think they're the main movers and shakers. Oh, cyclist and cycling. I believe they're the main movers and shakers behind the Biden administration. Excuse me. So, what am I trying to say here? Let's look at his amazing legacy. The Democratic Party in America, there's another cyclist. Maybe these cycle lanes aren't so bad after all. The Democratic Party in America have supplied all the weapons and money to Israel to flatten Gaza, haven't they? That's America's work. The Israelis are just the patsies for that. And currently Israel's bombing Lebanon, Syria, Yemen to flatten Gaza. It's a shit stain in humanity, that little mistake that the British made in the 1940s. So let's leave that one there. So Biden's responsible for flattening an entire city and the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Now, that's just disgusting, isn't it? I mean, nobody can justify what's happening there. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and the ICC, the International Criminal Court, both say they're committing genocide and they are in occupied territories. So let's just throw that little experiment in the bin. The more pertinent issue for me and for Scotland and for the UK is the war in Ukraine. Now, when did that start? February of March, 2 years ago. So we're 2.5 years into it. I've heard there's about 100,000 dead Russians and maybe 600,000 dead Ukrainians. The killed in action to injured in action ratio is usually about ×3. So if there's 100,000 people dead in the conflict, there's 300,000 or 400,000 people that have been maimed or seriously injured in that conflict. This would be funny if it wasn't for the horrific human cost, but every European government jumped behind. Oh, here's another guy in a cycle. Every European government jumped behind Joe Biden to throw arms and weapons into Ukraine, to back a war that it was impossible ever to win, the most technologically advanced, most powerful military that has ever existed. It's currently the Russian military. Nothing since the end of World War II, since we had the Red Army, has given anything close to it. They're a monster. And that's got to be NATO. That's a joke, isn't it? NATO's primary purpose was to stop aggression in Europe via the USSR, which doesn't even exist anymore. So if NATO worked, there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine. NATO are quite happy sending Ukrainian men into the biggest human mincing machine that's ever existed. But they're not prepared to get in there and fight themselves, and I'll tell you why just now, because they would be crushed underfoot. If the Russian military decided to take the gloves off, they could wipe Europe out in an afternoon. So that's why NATO aren't wanting to get in there, so that's an absolute joke. But here's where I'm going with this. The European governments all back Joe Biden in his war in Ukraine. The guy shits himself, he's got no cognitive ability. Why would you take anything he does seriously, or why would you back any of his government's policies when they're actively backing a genocide and they got us involved in a war that I think was primary. They had a pop at Russia. The Russian economy is booming, their military is more powerful than it's ever been. The eastern section of Ukraine's been flattened, hundreds of thousands of people have died, but I think the primary purpose of that war was to destroy Europe, not Ukraine. The American economy is absolutely done in, so they've seen Europe as a competitor. As long as we had cheap Russian energy, Europe was a threat to the USA, so they needed to make more money. The USA's biggest exports war in their military, so they got Europe involved in this war. If Donald Trump gets in at the end of the year, he's going to stop the war, and Europe's going to be left with very, very high energy prices. It will take generations to rebuild a relationship with Russia, who were Europe's primary supplier of raw materials and energy, weren't they? That's going to take generations. The Russians hate us. And all our politicians jumped down the toilet for the sake of Joe Biden, a guy that can't string a sentence together and shits himself in public. Anybody else think this is absolutely bonkers, you know? So I will leave it at that. Europe has effectively flushed itself down the toilet for incontinent, is that right? Incompetent, geriatric maniac. I don't hate Joe Biden for what he did over the past couple of years, because he's obviously not in control of anything. But I've seen videos of him from when he was a young guy. He was always a demon. The guy's a right ghoul. So Europe, well done. Well done to the Rishi Sunaks and the Keir Starmers, the Emmanuel Macrons, the Olaf Scholzes for doing what this guy told us to do. He's off. Trump gets in, that war ends, but Europe's still left high and dry, because instead of negotiating with the Russian Federation about a new security framework in Russia, NATO's over. Forget about that. If you were trying to advertise an organisation whose primary function was to keep the USSR and Russia at bay, they've not had very good advertisements. So Europe's effectively flushed itself down the toilet, and if Trump gets in, we've been left high and dry. If we ever do business with Russia again, we'll not be negotiating any deals with. And if Trump does get in, Russia will get what they want. Europe will negotiate a new security framework in Europe with Russia. Putin doesn't want American nuclear weapons or NATO on his borders. Trump hates NATO. He thinks America's spending too much money on it. He's going to throw that in the bin, isn't he? That's the easiest deal Trump is ever going to do in his life. He'll go over and say to Putin, what do you want? Okay, we'll move the missiles back. Okie dokie. Then America might do deals over Russian oil and gas. Who knows? Anyway, Biden, glad to see the back of him. Kamala Harris, maybe I hope she gets in, because she's got the brain of an amoeba. The woman's thick as shit, isn't she? Right. Anyway, thank you for watching some politics, schmòlitics, and what was that? 3 cyclists we've seen using Glasgow's amazing cycle network. Right, see you all later. Right, cheery, bye.